The Galactic Union had always considered humans to be a species of little consequence. Their homeworld Earth was an isolated sphere tucked away in a relatively unremarkable star system, far from the center of galactic civilization. Observations of their development over centuries had shown nothing particularly impressive: no faster-than-light travel, no advanced energy weapons, and no large-scale interstellar colonies. To the Union's high councils, humans were little more than a curiosity, a primitive anomaly that had yet to evolve past its territorial squabbles and outdated technology. When the Great War between the Sci-Fi Dominion and the Galactic Union erupted across dozens of star systems, Earth was deemed too insignificant to be involved. No representatives from Sol had ever been invited to sit at the Union's table, and no emissaries from Earth had ever attempted to insert themselves into interstellar politics. As far as the Union was concerned, humans would remain an irrelevant species, untouched and uninvolved. For a time, this assumption held true. The war raged across the galaxy, consuming entire systems, devastating planetary populations, and reducing once thriving civilizations to dust. The Sci-Fi Dominion, an expansionist empire of ruthless warriors, sought to claim as much of the known galaxy as possible, subjugating worlds and extracting every last resource they could. Their war fleet was unmatched in size and firepower, boasting dreadnoughts that dwarfed any known warship in the Union's arsenal. Entire species had been wiped out in their conquest, and even the most advanced civilizations struggled to hold their ground. Earth remained untouched, ignored in the grand scheme of galactic affairs. It was not a strategic hub, nor did it contain any resources that the Sci-Fi found particularly valuable. The war raged on, and humanity continued its existence in blissful ignorance of the battles unfolding light years away. That all changed when a catastrophic miscalculation by the Union's fleet sent a Sci-Fi warband retreating directly into Sol space. The battle had been waged near the fringes of the Orion Arm, where Union forces had managed to drive back a Sci-Fi invasion force. In their desperation to escape, the Sci-Fi fleet activated their emergency FTL drives without precise calculations, scattering them across the void. One of their largest battleships, the Blood Vortex, along with a handful of escort vessels, found themselves exiting warp on the outskirts of the Sol system. It was supposed to be an uncharted backwater, an empty void of space where they could regroup and plot their next move. Instead, they found Earth. At first, the Sci-Fi commander, High Warlord Corthan, paid little attention to the blue-green planet orbiting its yellow star. His priority was repairing his ship and re-establishing contact with the Dominion's main fleet. But as the battle reports from across the galaxy came in, it became clear that the war was turning against them. The Union was pressing forward, and safe harbors were becoming increasingly rare. The Dominion needed resources, and they needed a foothold. Earth was undefended, seemingly primitive, and, most importantly, isolated. Corthan decided to take the planet. It was not intended to be a full-scale invasion. The Dominion's forces were stretched thin, and their focus remained on larger galactic conflicts. But Earth could serve as a temporary staging ground, a place to resupply and build a hidden base away from the Union's reach. Corthan's analysts predicted little resistance. Their scans revealed no planetary shields, no orbital defenses, and no starships capable of mounting any significant counterattack. The humans had little more than chemical-propelled missiles and crude planetary defense networks. It would be an easy conquest. The first phase of the operation was swift. Sci-Fi assault craft descended through Earth's atmosphere, targeting key military installations and communication hubs. Their goal was to cripple the planet's ability to organize a resistance before moving to secure major cities. Corthan expected immediate surrender, if not from world leaders, then from the terrified population. What he did not expect was the absolute refusal of humanity to kneel. The first sign that something was wrong came within hours of the initial strikes. Unlike other species that the Dominion had conquered, humans did not respond with panic and disarray. They did not attempt to negotiate or plead for mercy. Instead, they retaliated with a speed and ferocity that caught the Sci-Fi completely off guard. Military forces across the planet mobilized faster than any of Corfin's strategists had anticipated. Instead of retreating in the face of superior technology, they adapted. When their conventional weaponry failed against the Dominion's armor, they resorted to unconventional means: explosives hidden in seemingly harmless civilian vehicles, electromagnetic pulses that disrupted enemy sensors, cyber attacks that infiltrated and corrupted Dominion targeting systems. The Zyphar, who prided themselves on their structured and disciplined warfare, found themselves thrown into chaos by an enemy that refused to play by the rules of traditional combat. Every city became a battlefield, every street a war zone. Civilians fought alongside soldiers, using whatever means they had at their disposal. The Zyphar began taking losses, not just from military engagements, but from unexpected and highly creative countermeasures. Corfin watched in growing frustration as his forces struggled to gain control. Every attempt to establish dominance was met with resistance that defied all logic. Earth's armies should have fallen within days, yet they persisted, countering with tactics that were erratic, brutal, and terrifyingly effective. They lacked the advanced weaponry of the Dominion, but what they lacked in technology, they made up for in sheer ingenuity and an unwavering refusal to submit. Reports from the front lines described horrors that the Zyphar had never encountered before. Entire battalions vanished in dense jungles, ambushed by unseen forces that used the terrain to their advantage. Zyphar supply lines were sabotaged by attacks so precise that commanders suspected inside knowledge. Except there were no traitors, only humans who learned and adapted at an impossible speed. Soldiers in occupied zones reported civilians approaching them under the guise of surrender, only to detonate hidden explosives the moment the Zyphars dropped their guard. Corfin had underestimated them. The longer the battle stretched on, the more the Dominion's forces began to fracture. Morale among the Zyphar plummeted. This was supposed to be an easy conquest, yet every day brought new horrors. Every attempt to retreat was met with human forces closing in, cutting off escape routes with precision strikes. Then came the moment that truly terrified Corfin. His fleet's AI detected a massive spike in digital intrusions. At first, he assumed it was just another one of the primitive cyber attacks that humans had been launching, annoying but ultimately ineffective against the Dominion's encrypted systems. But then entire sections of the blood vortex went dark. Automated defenses deactivated, internal security doors locked Dominion soldiers inside rooms, trapping them like animals. The ship's navigation systems began recalibrating. Someone was hijacking the Dominion's flagship from the inside. Corfin finally understood. Humanity was not primitive. They were predators. The warlord had only one option left: retreat. The battle for Earth had been lost, not in overwhelming firepower, but in a brutal war of attrition that the Dominion could no longer sustain. He ordered the remaining Zyphar forces to abandon their positions and return to orbit. But even in retreat, they were hunted. Human forces followed them to the upper atmosphere, striking their departing vessels with repurposed weapons designed to pierce through armor. As the battered remnants of the Dominion's fleet fled the Sol system, Corfin stared at the planet below with a sense of unease he had never felt before. Humanity had been ignored for centuries, dismissed as insignificant. That was a mistake, and now the entire galaxy was about to learn just how dangerous a mistake it had been. High Warlord Corfin stood at the central command deck of the Blood Vortex, his claws tapping against the metal surface as he watched the battle unfold on the holographic display before him. His forces were in full retreat, their once dominant fleet reduced to scattered remnants, desperately attempting to escape Earth's atmosphere. It was an outcome he had never anticipated. Humans were supposed to be weak, unorganized, incapable of mounting any real defense. Instead, they had turned his invasion into a nightmare, a brutal war of attrition that his soldiers were no longer willing to fight. He had already lost too many. The Zyphar prided themselves on their strength, their unwavering discipline, Yet even the most hardened warriors had faltered in the face of humanity's unpredictable resistance. His troops no longer fought with confidence. They fought with desperation. Their communications were in shambles, their command structure fractured. The humans had turned every city into a battlefield, every landscape into a trap. The Dominion's forces, once so sure of their superiority, had been outmatched by sheer human adaptability. But Corthan was not ready to concede defeat. As the last of his ground forces abandoned their positions and began their ascent toward the fleet, he turned his attention to his remaining warships. Though heavily damaged, the Blood Vortex was still the most powerful vessel in orbit. It held enough firepower to level entire continents, to erase cities from existence with a single bombardment. He had hesitated to use it before, believing that Earth would fall quickly, that its submission was inevitable. That hesitation had cost him. Now, he would correct his mistake. "Target their capital cities," he commanded, his voice cold and measured. His officers hesitated, their gazes flickering with uncertainty. "Do it. If we cannot hold this world, we will make it uninhabitable. Let them drown in fire." The weapons arrays of the Blood Vortex hummed to life. Across its hull, massive plasma cannons swiveled into position, their targeting systems locking onto the largest human population centers. A single concentrated strike would be enough to turn entire cities to ash. The humans had fought like demons to protect their world, but none of that would matter if their world no longer existed. Corthan watched as the targeting indicators aligned. He would not be remembered as the warlord who failed to conquer Earth. He would be remembered as the one who burned it. Then the alarms began blaring. At first, he thought it was a malfunction, another one of the human cyber attacks infiltrating his systems. But as his officers scrambled to make sense of the warnings, the truth became clear. This was not sabotage. It was an attack. "Unidentified projectile inbound," one of his officers shouted. Multiple launch sites detected across the surface. Impact in less than 60 seconds. Corthan's eyes widened. The humans were striking back. His mind raced, analyzing the situation. Human weapons were primitive compared to Dominion firepower. Their missiles, their crude nuclear arsenals, none of it should have posed a real threat to a warship as advanced as the Blood Vortex. And yet, the panic in his officer's voice told him that something had gone terribly wrong. He barely had time to react before the first projectile struck. The impact sent a shockwave through the ship, causing the command deck to shake violently. Monitors flickered, power systems fluctuated. A second explosion followed almost immediately, this time ripping through the ship's lower decks. Corthan braced himself against the control panel, his claws digging into the metal as the ship groaned under the force of the blasts. "Report," he barked. The officer's response was laced with disbelief. "They hit our engines, we're losing power." Orbital stability compromised. Corthan's mind reeled. How? The humans had no known weapons capable of this. Even nuclear strikes shouldn't have been able to breach the Blood Vortex's defenses so easily, but as he scanned the incoming data, the answer became clear. These weren't conventional human weapons. The humans had turned their own space programs against him. Using outdated, repurposed launch systems, they had sent hundreds of projectiles into orbit. Crude kinetic weapons, essentially massive hunks of metal, traveling at hypersonic speeds. They had no explosives, no energy payloads, but they didn't need them. At the speeds they traveled, the sheer force of impact was enough to tear through hull plating, to crush anything in their path like a meteor strike. And the humans had launched dozens of them, targeting his fleet with terrifying precision. Corthan's fury turned to something colder. Fear. He had always considered humanity's lack of advanced weaponry to be their greatest weakness. He had assumed that because they had no energy-based weapons, no interstellar fleet, no planetary shields, they could never be a real threat. But now he understood. Humans didn't need superior technology. They didn't need energy weapons or advanced starships. They took what they had and used it in ways no other species would ever consider. They turned primitive tools into instruments of war, into weapons that could bring even the most powerful warships to their knees. The ship shuddered again, this time harder than before. A third projectile had struck the hull, breaching the lower levels. The artificial gravity flickered, and the lights dimmed as power conduits overloaded. Smoke filled the command deck, the acrid scent of burning metal stinging Corthan's nostrils. "Shields failing," an officer shouted. "Hull integrity compromised. We need to retreat, now, retreat." The word burned in Corthan's mind. He had never fled from battle before. He had never suffered such a humiliating defeat. But there was no other choice. The blood vortex could not withstand another barrage. He slammed his fist against the control panel. "All remaining vessels, initiate emergency jump sequence. Get us out of this system." The fleet, what little remained of it, scrambled to comply. One by one, the surviving ships engaged their FTL drives, disappearing into the void. The blood vortex's own jump drive sputtered as damage reports flooded in, but Corthan knew they had no other option. A final impact rocked the ship, sending him crashing to the floor. As he pushed himself back up, his vision swam, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. Humanity had not just survived, it had won. And as the blood vortex finally managed to engage its jump drive, escaping the Sol system in a blaze of distorted light, Corthan knew one thing with absolute certainty. The galaxy had made a grave mistake in underestimating Earth. The blood vortex emerged from FTL travel into the dark void of unclaimed space, its once mighty hull scarred and fractured. The remnants of the Zyphar fleet trailed behind, battered and broken. Inside the flagship, High Warlord Corthan paced through the corridors, his mind consumed by the weight of his failure. His forces had barely escaped Earth, and the price they had paid for underestimating humanity was beyond measure. Entire battalions lost, dreadnoughts shattered, and worst of all, his reputation, his very name, now stained with disgrace. The command deck was a scene of chaos. Officers scrambled to stabilize the ship, rerouting power from secondary systems in a desperate attempt to keep it operational. The vessel's main engines sputtered with erratic energy surges, and half of its weapons array was offline. Corthan clenched his fists, his claws digging into his palms. He had never suffered a defeat of this scale. A technician, his armor smeared with oil and coolant, approached with hesitance. "High Warlord, the ship's structural integrity is failing. Our power core is—" "Save me the excuses," Corthan growled. "I need solutions, not complaints." The technician swallowed hard. "We require full repairs, but our facilities are limited. The nearest Zyphar outpost is in the Draven Expanse. However," he hesitated, his voice lowering, "the War Council will demand an explanation for our losses." Corthan knew this all too well. His kind did not tolerate failure. The Dominion valued strength above all else, and returning in disgrace would invite scrutiny, even from those once loyal to him. The idea of standing before the Council, of explaining how a species deemed primitive had forced his retreat, was intolerable. He had no allies left among the warlords. If they sensed weakness, they would strip him of his command, or worse. He turned to his tactical officer, who was struggling to restore external communications. "How much of our fleet remains operational?" 5 warships, including the blood vortex," the officer responded. 3 more vessels are adrift, but their engines are beyond repair. We lost 70% of our forces over Earth." Corthan's grip tightened. He had led legions into battle, crushed civilizations beneath his command. Yet here he stood, reduced to a handful of surviving ships. His mind raced. He could not return in this state, not without a show of strength. If he was to salvage his position within the Dominion, he needed leverage, an advantage to shift the narrative of his defeat. The humans had exposed a fatal flaw in Zyphar strategy: arrogance. The Dominion had assumed technological superiority equated to military dominance, and Earth had shattered that illusion. But what if he could turn that weakness into an opportunity? Corthan straightened, his mind settling on a course of action. Set course for the nearest neutral station. We need to assess the situation beyond our borders before we return to the Dominion. The officer hesitated. A neutral station? High Warlord, if the Union learns of our condition, let them watch, Corthan interrupted. We have nothing to gain from secrecy now. The Dominion believes humanity to be irrelevant, but the truth is far more dangerous. The humans are unpredictable. They are far more resilient than we ever imagined. He turned toward the central console, activating a star map, his claws traced over the sectors of known space. We need intelligence, not brute force. We need to understand how Earth was able to resist. If we fail to learn from this defeat, then we will lose more than just one battle. We will lose our empire. The officer nodded and relayed the command. The battered fleet altered course, heading toward a trading outpost on the fringes of known space. As the blood vortex limped through the void, Corthan retreated to his personal chambers. The dimly lit room was lined with trophies from past conquests, relics from civilizations he had crushed. Each artifact had once served as a reminder of his triumphs, but now they felt meaningless. Seating himself before a communication terminal, he keyed in a secure transmission line. The War Council would demand answers, but he needed an ally before he faced them. A figure appeared on the screen. An older Zyphar with deep scars across his face, his eyes narrowing at the sight of Corthan. "Warlord Corthan," the figure said, his tone unreadable. "I assume you are not contacting me to boast of your victory." Corthan exhaled slowly. "No, I need information, and I need it now." The figure smirked. "Interesting. I heard whispers of your difficulties on Earth. It is rare for you to admit weakness." Corthan's expression remained cold. "The humans were not what we expected. I need to know if others in the Dominion are aware of what transpired." The older Zyphar studied him for a moment before speaking. "Rumors are spreading. Some believe you were ambushed by Union forces. Others say you encountered a new species of warriors. But the Council does not yet know the truth." Corthan leaned forward. "Then we have an opportunity." The older Zyphar raised a brow. "To do what?" "To reshape the narrative. The Dominion valued strength, but they also feared the unknown. If Corthan returned with a tale of humans as a significant military threat, the War Council might see his defeat as a necessary warning rather than an unforgivable failure. More importantly, if he framed the humans as a potential force that could one day rival the Dominion itself, then his survival would be seen not as disgrace, but as foresight. If the Council believes Earth is nothing more than an isolated anomaly, then my failure will be my undoing, Corthan continued. But if they see Earth the first sign of a greater danger, an emerging power that threatens the entire Dominion, then my experience becomes an asset. Instead of exile, I become the only one who understands how to fight them. The older Zyphar chuckled. "Clever. You wish to turn your failure into prophecy." Corthan did not smile. "I wish to ensure that I am not the last warlord to face Earth." The transmission ended. Corthan sat in silence for a long moment. His fleet was broken, his forces shattered, but he still had a chance to shape what came next. The Dominion had always believed that strength was the only path to victory, but Corthan had learned something else. Strength alone was not enough. Intelligence, adaptability, and unpredictability, these were the weapons that had turned humanity's apparent weakness into an overwhelming advantage. And if he was to reclaim his place among the warlords, he would need to use those same weapons himself. The blood vortex continued its journey toward neutral space, and Corthan prepared for the battle yet to come. Not on the battlefield, but in the halls of power, where the fate of the Dominion and perhaps the fate of humanity would be decided. The blood vortex drifted through the silent void as it neared the outskirts of the neutral trading outpost known as Vorus Station. The journey had been slow, each hour stretching longer than the last as Corthan brooded over his next move. His fleet was damaged, his forces diminished, but he still had control over the narrative of his failure. If he played his cards right, he would not return to the Dominion as a disgraced warlord. He would return as the only strategist capable of preparing for a threat the Empire had yet to comprehend. As the massive station loomed in the distance, Corthan turned his gaze to the viewing window, taking in the sprawling structure. Voris Station was an independent hub, unaffiliated with either the Dominion or the Galactic Union. It was a place of smugglers, traders, and information brokers, exactly the kind of place where secrets could be bought and influence could be manipulated. He needed intelligence, and he needed it before the War Council twisted his defeat into his execution. The command deck was quieter than usual. His officers moved with a subdued tension, still reeling from the humiliating retreat from Earth. He could feel their unspoken doubts, their fear that the Dominion would not forgive what had happened. But fear could be redirected. If he could make them see the bigger picture, they would follow him once more. "Prepare a landing party," Corthan ordered. "I want direct access to the intelligence markets. We are not here to repair the ship. We are here to reshape our future." His officers exchanged glances before obeying. Within minutes, the blood vortex transmitted docking clearance, and Corthan descended toward the station in a heavily armored shuttle. The moment he stepped onto Voris Station, the scent of industry and corruption filled his senses. The air was thick with the mingling odors of alien species, unwashed bodies, burning plasma fuel, and exotic spices from distant worlds. The corridors were dimly lit, the neon glow of merchant signs casting eerie reflections off metal surfaces. It was a place where loyalty was fleeting, where power belonged to those who could outmaneuver, outthink, or outgun their rivals. He walked with purpose, his crimson warlord's cloak trailing behind him as he led his entourage toward the information district. His presence alone commanded attention. The Dominion rarely sent its warlords to neutral space, especially not ones who had suffered a recent defeat. The traders and mercenaries lurking in the shadows watched him with curiosity, whispering among themselves. Corthan ignored them. He had only one objective. The intelligence broker he sought operated from a secluded enclave near the lower levels of the station, where information was currency, and credits alone were rarely enough to secure valuable secrets. The broker, an insectoid creature with multiple chitinous limbs and deep-set compound eyes, studied Corthan with a mixture of wariness and intrigue. "I did not expect to see a warlord of the Zyphar Dominion here," the broker said, his voice clicking with an unnatural cadence, "especially not one who has recently suffered setbacks." Corthan did not react to the taunt. "Spare me the commentary, I came for information." The broker's mandibles twitched. "Information is not given freely, warlord. It must be earned." Corthan reached into his belt and retrieved a small data crystal, placing it on the table between them. "This contains battle records from Earth. Strategic reports, recordings, analysis. Incomplete, but valuable to the right buyer. In return, I want everything you know about humanity." The broker's many fingers danced over the crystal, scanning its contents. A slow hiss escaped his throat. "Fascinating. So, the rumors are true. You did not face an ordinary resistance." Corthan leaned forward. "Tell me what you know." The broker's compound eyes gleamed. "Humanity is an anomaly. Many species have underestimated them before, and each one has learned the same lesson. Humans adapt. Their civilization may lack galactic influence, but their greatest weapon is not their technology. It is their unpredictability. They do not fight like other species. They do not submit under pressure. When they are pushed to the brink, they evolve." Corthan remained silent as the broker continued. "Long ago, the Union debated whether to uplift Earth, whether to bring humans into the galactic fold. The decision was made to observe instead. Why? Because every simulation suggested the same outcome. If humans were given time, they would surpass their overseers. They are not the strongest, nor the most advanced, but they are the most dangerous because they refuse to remain static. They are a species that turns its own weaknesses into strengths. Corthan's claws curled into his palms. He had seen it firsthand. Every time his forces had thought they had control, the humans had adjusted, had countered in ways no Dominion strategist would have predicted. It was not just about survival, it was about something deeper, something that no amount of superior firepower could suppress. "They are a plague waiting to spread," Corthan murmured. "Unchecked, they will one day pose a threat to the Dominion itself." The broker's mandibles clicked in amusement. "Perhaps, or perhaps they are a mirror, a reflection of what your empire once was before it became complacent." Corthan narrowed his eyes. "You speak as if you admire them." The broker's voice lowered. "I do not admire, I understand. And that is why I am still alive." Corthan exhaled, forcing himself to push aside his anger. He could not afford to let emotion dictate his next steps. He had what he needed. He stood, taking the data crystal with him. As he left the Enclave, his mind was already shaping the report he would deliver to the War Council. He would not return as a failure. He would return as the harbinger of truth, a truth the Dominion needed to hear. Humanity was not a mistake to be corrected. It was a threat to be contained. And if the Dominion did not act soon, Earth would not remain a backwater for much longer. It would become something far worse. A competitor. Corthan stood at the center of the Dominion War Council chamber, his gaze unwavering as he faced the assembled warlords. The chamber was vast, carved from obsidian and adorned with banners displaying the sigils of the most powerful military factions in the Dominion. At the far end of the room, seated on a raised platform, was the Supreme Warlord, an aged yet formidable figure whose word dictated the course of the Empire's conquests. The warlords surrounded Corthan in a semicircle, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright disdain. News of his retreat from Earth had preceded him, and whispers of his supposed failure had already begun to circulate. He could feel their judgment, their eagerness to see him fall from power. If he faltered now, his position within the Dominion would be lost forever. He had not come to plead for forgiveness. He had come to deliver a warning. The Supreme Warlord's voice echoed through the chamber, low and deliberate. "Corthan, you were given command over an expansion fleet and tasked with securing resources for the Dominion. Instead, you returned with barely a fraction of your forces. Explain yourself." Corthan met the Supreme Warlord's gaze, his voice steady. "I did not retreat because of incompetence. I did not return in disgrace. I returned because I have seen what the Dominion has ignored for too long. I have encountered a threat that, if left unchecked, will one day challenge our empire's very survival." A murmur rippled through the warlords, some exchanging skeptical glances. One of them, a towering figure clad in battle-scarred armor, stepped forward with a sneer. "You were defeated by a backwater species, a primitive world with no spacefaring fleet, no interstellar influence, and you expect us to believe they are a threat?" Corthan did not flinch. "Yes," the warlord scoffed. "Then you are a fool." Corthan clenched his fists, forcing himself to remain composed. "You speak from ignorance. You mock what you do not understand. You see Earth as nothing more than a minor world, but I tell you now, it is something far worse. It is a crucible, a forge of warriors unlike any the Dominion has faced." He gestured toward the datapad in his hand. "I have brought recordings, tactical reports, evidence of what transpired. Watch, and then tell me if I am a fool." The Supreme Warlord inclined his head slightly. "Show us." Corthan activated the display and the chamber darkened as holographic projections filled the space. Footage from the battle over Earth played before them. XFAR warships being torn apart by crude kinetic projectiles, ground forces being dismantled by human guerrilla tactics, Dominion soldiers being overwhelmed by an enemy that fought with an unrelenting ferocity. The warlords watched in silence. Then came the final piece of evidence. Data extracted from the Blood Vortex's systems, showcasing the human ability to hijack Dominion technology. tactical AI systems overridden, defense grids sabotaged, human operatives infiltrating Zephyr command networks, using nothing but ingenuity and a ruthless efficiency that defied every expectation. When the projection ended, the chamber remained still. Then, the same warlord who had mocked Corthan earlier stepped forward once more. "They fight like animals," he said, though there was no longer mockery in his voice, only unease. "They do not follow the rules of war." Corthan nodded. "That is why they are dangerous." The Supreme Warlord leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "What do you propose?" Corthan exhaled slowly. "The Dominion must not make the same mistake twice. We cannot afford to treat Earth as an afterthought. If we allow them time, they will not remain a minor species. They will become a force capable of standing against us." The Supreme Warlord studied him for a long moment. "You believe they could become our equal?" Corthan hesitated, then shook his head. "No. If they are given time, they will surpass us." The War Council erupted in murmurs again, but this time there was no outright dismissal, only concern. The Supreme Warlord remained silent, considering Corthan's words. Finally, he spoke. "You bring us an uncomfortable truth, Corthan, one that contradicts what we have long believed. But the evidence is clear. Earth is not to be ignored." Corthan felt a flicker of relief, but it was brief. His mission was not yet complete. The Supreme Warlord's gaze hardened. "We will not allow them to grow unchecked. The Dominion does not tolerate threats. If they have the potential to challenge us, then we will erase that potential before it can manifest." Another warlord nodded in agreement. "We must strike before they can advance any further. This time, we send our full might." Corthan's breath slowed. He had succeeded in making them understand the danger, but now he realized he had set something far worse in motion. The Dominion would not attempt to contain humanity. It would attempt to annihilate it. Corthan straightened, his expression unreadable. He had secured his place among the warlords, but at what cost? He had warned the Dominion of humanity's strength, but in doing so, he had condemned Earth to a war unlike any it had ever seen. As the War Council began discussing preparations for a full-scale invasion, Corthan remained silent, his thoughts consumed by a single question. Had he saved himself only to ensure humanity's destruction? Or had he just set the stage for the greatest war the galaxy would ever know?